Keys and Kingdoms is one of the settings we're creating for the Aegis game system. We have no structure currently in place for the actual system, but the setting aims to combine your classic D&D style high fantasy with the vibes of a Disney-esque animated fairy tale musical, though generally with adult theming. Unless you run a campaign that's appropriate for children, you can do that, we're not doing that. This series of videos, using the only medium in which I can properly express myself, Microsoft PowerPoint, will show off the 10 Keys and Kingdoms core rules, people, and the manner in which we're interpreting them in our 5th edition homebrew campaign. Using the original 5e rules from 10 years ago, not the new ones, we don't have time to learn to master subtle differences to the system. It's going to be all about the imagination and telling a story in this world we're building. The Keys and Kingdoms race known only as natives are a lot of things. They're the answer to the eternal question of why Goofy talks and Pluto doesn't. Pluto is a dog, Goofy is a native. A single species to represent any anthropomorphic animal you want to be. 5.5 was going to do something like that, a new core species based on the celestial Gardinals, called Ardlings. They ultimately weren't core because, well, it's definitely a big change of lore to introduce a whole new species like that, and, well, it happens all the time that the D&D team tries to introduce a new celestial-themed race because they don't like the Aasimar, but the fans like the Aasimar just fine, so they're all like, there's no need for that. Based on how long it's taken me to make this video and Ardlings still aren't a thing, I'm guessing they won't ever be a thing. Natives also correspond to toons, and as such might provide us a few civil rights metaphors. As I've said before, those seldom actually work, but we can try. And of course they're furry bait for the furry crowd. What good are anthropomorphic animals if they're not irresistibly sexy? One thing they're not is primitive tribal people and victims of colonialism. People have been assuming that's what I was going for because they're called natives and they're animal-themed. Yeah, no, that's not what I had in mind at all. The word was meant to invoke the idea of the natives of another world. They're called that because anthro-animals were the first cartoon characters. They were simply here first. That doesn't imply anything about their technology level or anyone being after their land. If anything, since anthro-animals usually inhabit the modern world, I've always pictured the small villages they inhabit being reminiscent of modern suburbia. At least as close to that as we can get without jarring the medieval fantasy aesthetic too much. Here are the sample natives I commissioned. Design rules. Nobody who plays RPGs obeys the book's design rules, but here's what they are. The animal a native resembles is called their face creature, or simply their face. Despite that term, they have the entire head of that animal. From there, they're human from the neck down, apart from having the face creature's skin covering over their shoulders, sternum, and spine. Hands and feet which are partly between human and face creature, and of course most natives will have a tail atop their otherwise human derriere. The face creature must be a tetrapod, that is to say, a mammal, bird, reptile, or amphibian. There are, canonically, no natives who resemble fish or invertebrates. But, you know, the goal is for this game to become widespread enough that somebody will ignore that rule someday. And for the record, the two in this set who seem to have human hair are wearing wigs. That's a common fashion accessory in their culture, along with earrings, body paint, and being more likely than humans to go without shoes or shirt. The 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide has a bit in its section about homebrewing races where it suggests that you might replace the halflings in your setting with giant anthropomorphic mice without changing anything about their stats. Inspired by that passage and knowing there were no halflings in the Keys and Kingdoms universe, I gave natives a few abilities inspired by those that halflings have in 5th edition. So, here's the 5th edition adaptation of native stats. A native might be small, medium, or large, depending upon the size of their face creature. Check the appendix of beasts in your monster manual. If a native's face creature is of the tiny size category, the native is 2 to 3 feet tall, of the small category. If the face creature is gargantuan, the native is 8 to 9 feet tall and large. And if the face creature is any other size category, the native is medium in size. About 4 feet tall for a small face creature, 5 feet tall for a medium one, 6 feet for a large face creature, 7 feet for huge. Do you remember how 3rd edition used to have 2 size categories smaller than tiny and 1 larger than gargantuan? The Aegis system will have even more size categories than that because, as mentioned before, it's important for diminutive-sized heroes to be viable but also sensible. I don't know if 5e has any rules for large-sized player characters, so if your face creature is a brontosaurus or a big whale, then go for it, but I can't help you further. Regardless of size, they have the speed of a typical medium creature. Now, natives, despite their beastly appearance, are essentially human in every way. Their senses of hearing, smell, and sight, as humans, period. For their ability score modifier, we're inverting how a variant human can have +1 to 2 ability scores of your choice. A native player character has +2 to 1 score of your choice. Natural attacks. While natives are indeed mostly human, many of them do have claws and teeth. Ergo, upon creating your native character, you can choose to have your unarmed strikes possibly deal slashing or piercing damage instead of bludgeoning, if that suits your character's anatomy. Still only 1 point of damage, just maybe a different type that might come in handy later. You have to pick one at character creation and stick with it forever because that suits the 5th edition feel, but in Aegis, all sorts of unarmed attacks will be viable, so a single native will often be able to deal a bludgeoning punch, a slashing claw, and a piercing bite at will, depending on what's going to work best. And from there, as I said, we have the halfling traits of luck and bravery. These will be things that shape native culture and the way other people perceive them. I don't want any trait to be something that's just kind of in the background. Lifespan. Once again, exactly the same as humans. Yep, did that again. Sorry. No eggs or anything. They always give birth the same way humans do because, again, almost totally human from the neck down. That includes whatever you're wondering about. The rules for what face a native is born with based on what face their parents had is a pretty elaborate system we won't go into right now, but take my word for it that said system is finished. Creature type is humanoid once again. Once again, a different kind of humanoid than the others we've seen so far. We'll go into the Aegis creature type system soon. Let's assume the base playable native just speaks common, and the typical native alignment is lawful good. The typical native is a law-abiding citizen, as long as the law is good and fair. That's what lawful good means. Laws can be changed if they suck. Yuck, thanks for joining me. Stay tuned for more vids on the peoples of Keys and Kingdoms.